This is the story of how Akai Electric created Akai Professional in the early 1980s, and how Akai created some of the top samplers in the late 80s. Actually, they controlled the whole market for samplers for many years because they were efficient and easy to use, and how they created one of the most popular drum machines ever made that has never been beaten by Sony, Yamaha, Roland, or Korg, the MPC. And how this man, James Ting, stole over $1 billion from Akai Professional, moved all its shares over to a new company in Hong Kong with billionaire Stanley Ho. After the war ended in 1945, Japanese citizens were trying to get back to normal, building businesses, starting a really good economy, and helping each other. In 1946, Saburo Akai wanted to start a business. He had a work shed in the back of his house given to him by his adoptive father, Masakichi Akai. He would make electrical circuits, sockets, microphones, systems for speakers as well. He was designing electronic consumer products. He approached Masakichi about starting a company, and Saburo Akai asked Masakichi to be the president of the new company, Akai Electric. And over time, the company started to grow. They were making turntables, they were making speakers, amps, and then in 1954, Saburo Akai created the first Japanese tape machine, a high-end tape machine to record audio, vocals, and music. It helped them get a lot of consumers to have confidence in their products, and with a new tape machine that no one had, it was popular. They also made turntables, and then rock and roll came. Black soldiers were coming back home to their homes and their communities to try and get back into the regular life. Now, a lot of black soldiers didn't find jobs as their white counterparts did, being there was such racism in America, as many blacks moved out of the South up north to get better jobs and the hope to live a better life. So what they did was create their little bands or find other ways to help out to make money. But they created some sort of music that was like this rock and roll, and it was the beginning of rock and roll. They'd play in churches like Methodist churches or Baptist churches, and they would put these bands together and play the standard music, but in a rock and roll way. This became very popular amongst black communities. Black rock and roll was getting popular, not just as records, but also on black radio stations. And radio is free. And so white kids are listening to this music, they're dialing in going like, wow, they love the beat, they love the music, they love the lyrics. And the white males making these records, these companies, were being offered the right to use the copyrights to supply white artists. Because back then, black artists could not get played on white radio stations. And this changed everything for companies like Akai. Now, between 1946 and 1951, Akai Electric started to grow. Each year they kept growing. They formed a relationship with Mitsubishi Bank, and they would use the loans to create their own products, electronic consumer goods like turntables, radios, record players, 33, 45, and 78 speed motors. Also speakers, speaker systems, power amps, tube amps. They were selling everything. And the reason why this sells so quickly and gets big, rock and roll is growing at the same time. It's no longer just in a black community. Everyone's trying to play it in every country around the world. Saburo Akai is making money. He's minting it. They're getting pretty famous, and they're very famous around the world. Then, in 1972, Saburo Akai dies in a skiing accident. Now, Akai Electric had over 100,000 employees around that time. And so they're starting to lose their grip in the business, primarily because they have to get the right product to the right person. And then, in 1979, Sony introduces the Sony Walkman. This changes the entire makeup of the consumer electronic industry of supplying customers. Before, it was a turntable. Many people can listen. Now each person can get their own singular device. By 1983, they decide to make a special division within Akai, the Akai Professional Division, to create musical instruments. They introduce Akai Professional to the world in 1984. And for their first release, they came out with analog synthesizers that sounded similar to the Roland Juno series, which was obvious, but they had to get started some way. And they also had multi-track recorders. Now these synthesizers and multi-track recorders were designed by Hill founder Kazuo Morioka. Then in 1985, David Cockerell, known for his work with EMS and electroharmonics, formed a partnership with Akai Professional and began designing his entire Akai S series, which is about sampling. Now, sampling starts to become big because it was so expensive before then. Now, that first sampler David Cockerell made with Akai for the famous Akai S series was the S612, a 12-bit sampler. Didn't do a lot of sampling, but it was clean enough and usable, particularly in the low end. Then, in 1986, after the bankruptcy of Lynn Electronics, Roger Lynn is invited as an advisor and a guest developer for their next project. You see, Roger Lynn was already famous. He had created the LM1. This drum machine was the first drum machine with sampler chips inside of it. And so it became super famous. A matter of fact, if you've ever heard a Prince album, particularly Purple Rain, and that song When Doves Cry, you get a perfect example of how that drum machine sounded. It was very popular. It was popular on Michael Jackson's Beat It album. It was popular with everybody, including Madonna. I don't care who it was. If you're making hit records, you had to have that machine. Now that machine made Roger Lynn very famous. Then he made the next machine, which was called the Lynn Drum, and that was a very good machine as well. In 1986, he goes bankrupt. But of course, Akai is watching this. They give him a phone call, they want him on their next project. Now when he comes in, he helps develop one of the most popular drum machine samplers in the world even today, the MPC series. Now, he also helped develop their second product, which is the ASQ-10. Now, the beauty of the ASQ-10 was that it was a sequencer that could sequence anything. But in reality, it was the whole sequencing section of the MPC-60 that was taken out to become a separate device. Now, this was brilliant, actually, because the problem in most studios back then was trying to sync various devices, like an SP1200, a Roland Phantom, maybe a Korg Triton, whatever you had to make them all work together. And this is what the ASQ-10 did. It actually was more famous than the MPC-60 back then, until the MPC-60 gained more momentum with the MPC-62. It was cheaper. The MPC-60 cost $5,000. Obviously, that's too expensive. Then around 1991, Akai wants to make a brand new MPC. Actually, the same one, but improve it. But they're really not improving it. They're taking stuff off. They're getting rid of the metal. They're getting parts to be more plastic. They want to make a higher profit, obviously. So they make a new one, the MPC-62. This sells for about $2,000, equaling the cost of an SP1200 at the time. And then all of a sudden, EMU stops selling the SP1200. They get bought out by another company. That company doesn't want to make the device. And now the door's wide open. Then in 1994, they bring Roger Lynn back in again for one more device he wants to do. He wants to make the MPC 3000. This is probably one of the most awesome drum machine samplers ever made. And it was the last MPC that Roger Lynn got to make. Now, there's a problem going on at this point. It's around 1997, and Akai Electric has got a problem with management, the inability to make a quality product, and now it's digital. It's compact disc. It's DATs, digital audio tape. They have to make new devices to compete with the rest of the world, and they really can't. So around 1997, they get sold to a new company, to International Semitech Microsystems.
The parent company of Akai, Akai was primarily a consumer electronics firm that had this little division that did electronic music, but it was a small division within Akai. But the big Akai hadn't really been profitable for a long time. It had been sort of financed by, I believe, Mitsubishi Bank. Long story about how the original Akai died in a skiing accident, and he didn't have the right kind of will, and everything was going to be eaten up by taxes, and there was friend between his family and the family that was involved with Mitsubishi, and Mitsubishi came in and bought up a bunch of the stock so that they could pay these taxes and keep Akai alive. But as a result, Akai was mostly financed by Mitsubishi Bank. And this is at a time when financial things were getting really tight in Japan altogether, and Akai had been losing money in their consumer electronics division, and Mitsubishi Bank eventually said, we're going to sell. We can't keep propping this up, which was a shame because the electronic music division was still making money, but they were still a small part of it all. And as a result, the entire Akai company got sold to someone in Hong Kong, a company called Semitech Global, that was basically run by one guy, Mr. Ting.
Marco used to work for EMU Systems. They made the SB12 and the SB1200, and he marketed these items for the company. And what he realized was that hip-hop was bigger than they thought. He saw it just wasn't a black thing. It was global.
So I go to Akai where the other iconic hip-hop machine, the MPC 3000, is. And my first thing there was, look, you've got this $3,500 flagship here, but with this sort of democratization of music production that's happening, there's a lot of people coming in on the bottom who really want to take part in this. And they would love a piece of something that's, so iconic in their world, like an MPC 3000. So if we could build a lower cost MPC, I guarantee you that thing would be in a monster hit. And their first reaction was, no, we can't do that. The MPC 3000 is this flagship, and this would take away from it, and it would devalue it. And I said, no, it wouldn't. Particularly if you look at the rap hip-hop world. Rap hip-hop people, if they can afford an MPC 3000, and there's a lower cost one down here, they're going to buy the MPC 3000. They want to be seen to have the pro best. What you're going to get down here are people who simply cannot afford an MPC 3000. And the MPC brand is going to be, it's going to spread throughout that entire world. And it was back and forth, and eventually it was like, look, you hired me to give you strategic marketing consultation. Do you want me to or not? You presumably hired me because you value my history of this sort of thing, and I really think we ought to do this. So eventually they said, okay, kind of reluctantly, we'll give it a try. And so they started what became the MPC 2000. And it was an interesting process working back and forth. I went to Japan 3 or 4 times a year, and Akai had an R&D team in the UK as well, and we used to go there. So it was a lot of traveling during those years. But I forged a relationship with a product manager in Tokyo, and we worked back and forth on what exactly the MPC 2000 would be. Roger Lin wasn't involved in this. His contract with them had ended at the time. And eventually the MPC 2000 came out and became the single most successful launch in the history of Akai. That thing sold like 10,000 the first year at about $1,500, which in those days was unheard of. And suddenly the world of young people doing their own rap hip-hop production in their bedroom exploded around the MPC 2000, and it was an amazing thing to see.
And what James Ting did then, in the year 2000, was that he sold the shares to Semitech and Akai, including Akai Electric and Akai Professional, to his own company in Hong Kong called Grande Holdings, which he founded in 1987. But James Ting is then on the list of criminals who need to be arrested. He's a Canadian citizen, so the shares of Semitech Global Microsystems has a problem. The investors lose millions, and he has to be arrested. Then also, the job he did with Akai by selling those shares screws Mitsubishi Bank out. He needs to be arrested for that as well. And he ends up in Hong Kong, and they arrest him. He gets arrested. He goes to jail. He's supposed to do 6 years. He does 1 year and a retrial comes up. He shows up for the retrial. The next time they're supposed to go back to court, he's missing and no one has seen him since. Now, how this whole thing worked, though, was that Stanley Ho, who ended up becoming the CEO and controller of Grande Holdings, owned everything at some point. And so James Ting eventually probably had nothing. And the word out is that Ho was a gambler. And he knew how to get rid of people if they didn't pay their debts. And somehow we think James Ting is gone because no one can find him.